Hello, my name is Alex. This is Big L Books. Today I'm here to do my May wrap up. I made it through 12 books this month, so in order for us to not be here all day, I'm just gonna jump right into this video. So the first books that I finished reading this month were the Danzig Trilogy by Gunter. So that is made up of The Tin Drum, Cat and Mouse, and Dog Years. So I've already done a review video that kind of introduces this trilogy and talks about it in greater detail, so I will link that down below. But basically, in a brief summary, this is the major trilogy that built Gunter Grass's reputation as an author, and he is arguably Germany's most important post-war author. So these are highly worth checking out. They are a series of books that are set in Danzig, which is now the city of Dansk in Poland, during World War II. So they deal with a little bit of what life is like before the war, what life is like during, and what it was like afterwards. And all of these three books can be read as standalones. There is not a lot of overlapping characters. It's more that they deal with the same place, the same time, and a lot of the same themes and concepts. So out of the three books in this trilogy, The Tin Drum is easily the most famous, and I think it deserves to be that way. This book was just the most fun to read. I really enjoyed myself. It's about the life of Oscar Matzerath, who's this guy who's like 3 feet tall, he plays a drum, and he has a crazy life, and it was just a lot of fun to read about. Although I have to say, I'm glad that I went further and read the whole trilogy, because I think Dog Years is the artistic triumph of the trilogy, I guess, even though it was really complex and difficult to read. I think that this was a really incredible book that I don't hear a lot of people talking about. So overall, I am glad that I stuck through and finished this whole trilogy. To take a break from the heaviness of the Danzig trilogy, I was also rereading A Prayer for Owen Meany by John Irving. And this is honestly a book that I can see myself rereading for the rest of my life, because I am just so in love with the character of Owen Meany. Like Oscar from The Tin Drum, he is this ferocious character inside a tiny body, so he is so fierce and so original and so opinionated. I'm just completely in love with Owen Meany. Every time I read this book, he jumps off the page and leaps straight into my heart. So if you want to hear more about this book, I've also done a review of this, so I'll link that down below. After that, I read The Circle by Dave Eggers. My boyfriend and I both were reading this book before going to see the movie, which I do not recommend. That was a hot mess. But the book was pretty fun. It is the fastest 500-page read that I feel like I've ever read. It was kind of like junk food, you know, you'd want to binge a lot in one sitting, and it was fun at the time, but it's not necessarily satisfying afterwards, kind of. It doesn't give you that much to think about. So this book is about a blank slate of a human being named May, who goes to work for this new hot tech company called The Circle. So basically imagine Facebook and Google, any kind of trendy internet company like that, and they are just completely revolutionizing the world with their innovations, and May thinks that everything is so amazing, but any reader with half a brain will realize that a lot of what they're doing is often quite problematic. A lot of the problems boil down to the concern of how much of our privacy are we willing to give up in order to improve public safety or like the common good. So for example, this company develops these like tiny cameras that they want to put everywhere to, you know, stop people from committing crimes, or so that disabled people can see the whole world without leaving their house. And it all sounds so great, except there are a lot of obviously terrible things about being filmed all the time. That's not necessarily healthy for a functioning society. So this book tackles a lot of issues like that. It's kind of like an episode of Black Mirror. Dave Eggers isn't very creative with any solutions or anything, but it was a fun read and a lot better than the movie. After that, I read My Cat Yugoslavia by Pajtim Statovci. This book came out in Finnish a few years ago. This is the first English translation, although I think the Finnish title sounded a lot better. Kisani Yugoslavia. But what can you do? So I found this to be a pretty original debut novel. It follows the lives of two characters. There's Pajtim, whose family left Kosovo during the Yugoslavian war, moved to Finland, so it's largely about his experiences growing up as a refugee, and he finds that the Finns are often quite racist and intolerant and had a pretty difficult time fitting in. As well, he's trying to negotiate the gay dating scene when he's older, and Finland is a culture that values macho men, so again, it's kind of a difficult place to be gay in sometimes. So he had some difficulties with that, and he meets a talking cat at a gay bar, which I thought was going to be incredible, but the talking cat was just actually really mean, and he was homophobic and anti-immigrant and not a nice person to live with. So I'm not really sure what the whole point of there being a talking cat was. It was kind of jarring to have these surrealist elements in the story, when especially the narration by the other character, who's Bekim's mother, which was always very straightforward and linear. It just made it weirder when all these like strange mystical things were happening in Bekim's story. But his mother's story is all about her growing up in Kosovo. She enters an arranged marriage with a man who becomes abusive and then has to flee the country with her kids and set up shop in a completely new environment. And it's obviously a very difficult experience. So I found this book was patchy and there were a few flaws, and it's, you know, very clearly a debut. He was trying a lot of things. I'm not really sure that they worked. There were the symbols of cats and snakes that I never really figured out exactly what they meant, but still, these are important narratives to be reading about, so it was a valuable read still, and I will be interested to see what he does next. After that, I read The Crying of Lot 49 by Thomas Pynchon. The only other Pynchon book I've read before was V, and I was very on the fence about how I felt about it, which was a shame because I just always imagined that I was going to love Thomas Pynchon, and I did with this book, so it has tilted the scales very favorably in regards to Thomas Pynchon. But this was a book that I read twice this month. So the first time I read it, it was in one day, and I just raced through it because I couldn't put it down. And then I read it again over the course of a week. It just took my time, read it very carefully, wrote down a bunch of passages, and it's just so impressive how much is crammed into this short little novel of 150 pages. Like, there are world upon world in this book, and that's what I just love about it. It is about a stereotypical Californian housewife named Oedipa Maas, who finds out that she's been made the executor of her dead ex-boyfriend, who's like this millionaire property owner, and she gets into this situation that is just completely over her head, especially when she starts discovering this potential conspiracy theory involving an alternative mail delivery service. So it is just a fun novel about paranoia and failure of communication systems, and it was just so enjoyable. I can't wait to read more Thomas Pynchon in the future, and hopefully I can collect my thoughts better and make a review on this soon. Then I read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, which is a book I've been meaning to get around to for a while since it's Toni Morrison's debut novel. I think it's the fourth Toni Morrison book that I've read now, and once again, she delivered. Like, she just never lets me down. She's such a great writer. What I like about what she does is that she presents this kind of initial issue or dilemma at the start, and then she uses the whole novel to zero in on each of the characters at the start, so that when you zoom out again by the end, you have such a rich tapestry of this world and these deep characters. So at the start of The Bluest Eye, we're introduced to Pekkala, who has been impregnated by her father, and all the neighbors are gossiping about that. So it's a pretty grim situation, and Pekkala is just a very tragic character to be at the center of a novel. She is just like the downtrodden of society. She is just this young black girl from a poor family, and it was so depressing reading about all the times when people would refer to Pekkala as ugly, because she soon internalized that and truly believed it, and all she wanted in this book were a pair of blue eyes because she thought that might make her pretty again. And it just shows you how toxic those racially charged beauty standards can be, how society sometimes values traits associated with little white girls like blonde hair and blue eyes, often at the expense of girls who grow up looking different and feeling like they're not as important, and internalizing a lot of negative thoughts that can have some pretty dire consequences when they grow up. But there are also a lot of very funny moments. You know, it's about growing up, and the communities in Toni Morrison's books are just always amazing, and I just want to be a part of them. Like, there's a prostitute in this novel who's known around town as the Maginot Line, and there's a character who everyone attributes their death to Death by Peach Cobbler. Like, rich details like that just really make her books for me. So it was a pretty quick read. I just sped through this in 2 days and really enjoyed myself. Then I read a collection of short stories by James Baldwin called Going to Meet the Man. It was an uneven collection for me. I could say some of them didn't really do much for me, but there were quite a few really impressive ones, especially Sunny's Blues. That is such a great short story. It's about two brothers who just don't really see eye to eye. One of them is kind of on the straight and narrow. He's a teacher and he has a family. His brother Sunny is into drugs and jazz, and they live such different lives, but they're trying to reconnect. It's also about what it was like to grow up in Harlem and that feeling of escaping Harlem but never really being able to leave. And it's also about music and how you can express things that you can't with your words. So this was just such a great story. A lot of the themes resonated with me. That was the real standout of the collection for me, but I did also enjoy This Morning, This Evening, So Soon, which is about a man who's built a career as a singer in Paris, and he's going to be moving back to America with his family, except that he's black, and he's not exactly sure that he's ready to go back to good old racist America, so it's like about his thoughts before he goes. As well, the story, Going to Meet the Man, I can't say that it was enjoyable because it was the most disturbing story I've probably ever read in my life. And it's about a racist Southern police officer who is reflecting on his life before he goes to bed at night and has some memories about a lynching that he attended as a child. And it was just such a disturbing and upsetting but also very powerful story. So those three stories really made the collection worth it for me. And speaking of depressing things, I decided to reread Tess of the D'Urbervilles by Thomas Hardy. This is a very depressing novel that questions societal values of the time. So if you're reading this as a modern reader, you're just going to be shaking your head the whole time. Because I feel like today maybe the whole conflict could have been avoided because we have less rigid social norms regarding virginity, and especially the double standard in this book will really knock your socks off. So it can be a very angering book to read. You know, Thomas Hardy was in a dark place when he wrote this because like only a few pages into the novel, Tess and her younger brother are having a conversation about life, and he asks her what kind of planet she thinks that this is, and she calls it a blighted star. So this is a book all about how depressing fate can be and about the tension that we face as people because we are just really these animals. We're creations of nature, but then we're also trying to live in this world with these societal values imposed on how we live our lives with these religious morals, and it creates conflict for a lot of people. And in Tess's situation, it creates so much strife and unnecessary drama. So this is a novel that does not shy away from controversy and is not afraid to ask some pretty big questions. Definitely not as scandalous to the modern reader, but it is still a very engaging read. Lots of beautiful passages about nature, especially when Tess is working as a dairymaid on an English farm. And even though the plot is completely absurd, I was still pretty enraptured by this book, and it is a great novel. For my Dostoevsky of the month, I read The Double, which was his second work to be published. Poor Folk was met with a good amount of critical admiration, but not so much for The Double. People did not like this one, and they found that he was just kind of ripping off Nikolai Gogol, which is true in a lot of ways. You can totally find traces of Dead Souls, of The Nose, Diary of a Madman. It's all there, but you could sort of see how Dostoevsky adds more psychological depth to his characters, and in The Double you can especially see a lot of the weirdness that was going to overtake his later novels, especially the idea of this protagonist with this split personality. You could see that's going to be huge in his later works, so it's exciting to watch him play with these themes as a younger, less experienced writer. But this is the story of Mr. Goliadkin, who is this kind of pathetic civil servant, and he's so socially awkward and introverted, and he's ambitious, but he's not really able to achieve success at work because he doesn't know how to be a social climber. And his doctor tells him to go to a party and have fun, and he tries to do that, and it fails spectacularly. So he has this kind of crisis. He's walking home in a snowstorm, and all of a sudden, his double appears on the street. And it's all about that fractured, split personality experience where he's got this guy who looks exactly like him, except is different from him in a lot of significant ways. Where this guy is able to be successful at work, he's able to suck up to the boss and to go to these social functions and, excel. It's an engaging plot for the most part, although even though the book is only 170 pages long, it somehow felt like it was like twice as long as it needed to be. I felt like it did get rather repetitive, but I think that I enjoyed this one more than Poor Folk, which was a lot more sentimental. Like, this is the weird Dostoevsky that I like, where people are having these crazy outbursts in public and you just don't know what's going on. So it was exciting to see his voice emerging as a young author. The last thing I read this month was Romeo and Juliet. This was a reread for me, but I'm going to see a production of the play in a few days, so I wanted to brush up. Since it has been about 10 years since I had to read this in school, although not much had really changed. It was exactly how I remembered it. I have to say that my favorite production of this story is The Ballet by Sergei Prokofiev, and I feel like the music does such a better job of conveying the tragedy of the story than the play can. I mean, the play just seems silly a lot of the times. It doesn't help that there's like so many dick jokes. I mean, it's just constant. Like, they just don't let up. So I really enjoyed listening to the ballet while reading it, but the play was fine. I also found it interesting that I didn't hate Friar Lawrence as much as I did last time. Like, I thought that I despised his character, but he didn't really offend me that much this time. I sort of get what he was trying to do. Maybe he's not a terrible person, so I guess I have matured in the 10 years that I have read this play from the last time that I did. So those were the books that I read this May. All things considered, I think that that was a really good reading month, probably my best one so far of the year. So that's exciting. Let's talk about books in the comments. Please let me know what you've been reading and if you have any thoughts about these books. And thank you for watching, and see you again next time.